In the remote highlands, where the evergreen pines stretched endlessly toward the horizon, there lived a man and his German shepherd. His name was James Walker. Few people in town knew much about him. They knew he had once been a soldier, that he now worked as a forest ranger, and that he rarely spoke of his past. But anyone who looked into his eyes for long enough could sense that those eyes had seen more than a lifetime should have a bear. James had given over a decade of his life to the military. 10 years of dust, fire, and shadows. 10 years of carrying the weight of his comrades. Of missions that blurred the line between duty and survival. When the wars finally ended for him, James came back with a body intact but a spirit fractured in ways no one could see. After leaving the service, he chose the mountains. Here, in the quiet stretches of wilderness, he found work as a ranger. It was not glamorous long walks, constant vigilance, an endless cycle of patrols, but it gave him something he had craved for years. Silence. The silence of trees swaying in the wind. The silence of rivers whispering against stone. Silence deep enough that a man could finally hear his own heart. His mornings always began the same way. Before dawn, James laced his boots, pulled on his worn ranger jacket, and fastened the sidearm on his belt, not for battle, but for the rare bear or mountain lion that roamed the ridges. By his side, always, was Max, his German shepherd. Max was no ordinary dog. Strong, sharp-eyed, and loyal. He was James's closest companion. In many ways, Max was family, the one constant presence in James's otherwise solitary life. They shared meals by the fire, long treks through the valleys, and a kind of unspoken bond forged only in silence and survival. James often thought, if not for Max, these mountains would feel unbearably empty. That morning, the sky was clear and the air crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. As the sun began to rise, James and Max set off on their routine patrol. The trail beneath their boots was familiar, worn by years of footsteps. Birds chattered above, the wind whistled softly through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, water trickled over stone. It was the kind of morning that felt almost too peaceful, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. James moved with the discipline that never left him, every step measured, every sound catalogued. Even here, in supposed safety, the soldier inside him never fully slept. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks. His ears pricked at every crack of a branch. Old habits die hard. Ahead of him, Max trotted steadily, paws crunching against the bed of fallen leaves. Now and then, the dog glanced back, as if to make sure James was still there. Each look carried that familiar question. "You're with me, right?" James would nod, offering a faint smile in return. It was a simple rhythm they shared, one man, one dog, and the quiet wilderness between them. But peace, James knew, was fragile. It often shattered without warning. At a bend in the trail, Max came to a sudden halt. His body stiffened, ears rising, muscles tightening like a coiled spring. His dark eyes locked onto something invisible, something James could not yet see. James froze as well. His hand instinctively rested on the grip of his pistol. He followed Max's gaze, scanning the undergrowth, the trees, the shadows. But all he saw was forest, just forest, too still, too quiet. "What is it, boy?" James whispered. Max didn't bark. He took one cautious step forward, then another, as though guided by some force beyond sight or sound. His tail was rigid, his movements sharp, deliberate. James felt it then, a prickling at the back of his neck, a whisper of old instincts that told him something was wrong. Not wildlife, not a bear, not a deer, something else. He tightened his grip on the leash, his voice low and steady. "Easy, Max. Show me." And so they moved together, one man and his dog, stepping into an unseen current that would soon carry them far from the routine path of their daily patrol. In that instant, James knew today would not be like any other day. The mountains had their own rhythm, most mornings. It was easy for James to predict the flow of the daybirds greeting the sun, chipmunks darting across the trail, the steady whisper of wind moving through the pines. This morning felt different. The forest was quieter than usual, not silent, but subdued, the kind of quiet that makes a man listen more closely. James walked the trail with a steady pace, his boots crunching lightly against damp soil. Max trotted ahead, tail swaying, ears flicking at every small sound. Normally, the shepherd explored with a relaxed energy, pausing here and there to sniff a log or chase a drifting leaf. But today, his posture was sharper, head low, movements deliberate. James noticed it instantly. Years of military service had trained him to read the subtleties of a working dog. A lifted ear, a stiffened tail, signals that meant more than words. Something got your attention. James said softly, watching Max pause at a patch of tall grass. The dog didn't look back. Instead, Max lowered his nose, inhaling deep, and let out a sound James hadn't heard in weeks. A low, rolling growl. Not aggressive, but alert. James stopped, his senses sharpened. He scanned the trees, his hand unconsciously resting against the strap of his pack. The air smelled of pine and damp moss, the same as always. Nothing unusual. Yet the tension in Max's body told a different story. Easy, boy, James muttered, but his own voice carried the same caution. Max took a step forward, then another, his movements deliberate, almost surgical. James followed, keeping a short distance, eyes scanning the tree line the way he used to scan alleyways overseas. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was holding its breath. They reached a bend in the trail where fallen leaves carpeted the ground. Max froze again, his nose pressed against the earth, tail stiff, ears locked forward. James knelt beside him, brushing away the top layer of leaves. Beneath the soil looked disturbed, pressed down by weight, subtle but undeniable. Maybe an elk, maybe a bear. That's what James wanted to believe. But Max wasn't reacting to wildlife. This was different. His heartbeat slowed in that familiar, trained way, his body slipping into the soldier's mindset without asking. He drew a long breath, eyes flicking across the shadows, ears straining for what wasn't there. No birds, no chatter of squirrels. Just stillness, thick and uneasy. James tightened the strap across his shoulder and straightened up. "All right, partner," he whispered, more to ground himself than to guide Max. "Show me what you've got." Max looked up for the briefest moment, ears twitching as if to say he understood. Then he pressed forward, pulling James off the familiar trail and toward the undergrowth. The forest closed in around them, the canopy blocking out the rising sun. Each step carried them deeper into the unknown. James knew this wasn't just another patrol anymore. Something was waiting ahead, something the dog had sensed long before him. And he had learned, in war and in life, that instincts like these should never be ignored.
The trail narrowed as Max pulled James off the main route and into the undergrowth. Branches scratched against James's sleeves, and the ground grew uneven, roots jutting like hidden traps. It wasn't a path people usually took. In fact, it didn't look like a path at all until Max stopped at a patch where leaves lay unnaturally thick, as if someone had scattered them to cover tracks. James crouched, brushing the surface with his glove. Beneath a layer of brown and gold, he saw it clearly soiled, pressed down by tire treads, not fresh, but not old either. He traced the shallow impressions with his fingers, his chest tightening. "Good eye, buddy," he murmured. Max stood rigid beside him, ears flicking forward, body tense like a coiled spring. James rose slowly, scanning the tree line. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in narrow beams, turning dust motes into thin threads of gold. The forest should have felt alive, but the only sound was the faint rasp of his own breath and the distant drip of water from last night's rain. Every step forward carried weight. His boots sank slightly into the damp ground, and each crunch of leaves echoed louder than it should. He adjusted his pace, instinctively moving quieter, like the patrols he used to walk in villages halfway across the world. His body remembered even when his mind tried to forget. Max moved ahead in short bursts, nose low, tail stiff. James followed close, scanning the forest the way he used to scan rooftops and alleyways, flicking left, right, then back to the ground. Old habits that once kept him alive. A raven croaked overhead, breaking the silence, then fluttered deeper into the trees. James exhaled slowly. He didn't like how on edge he felt, but he trusted the tension. In combat, ignoring unease got people killed. Out here, it might make the difference between finding trouble or walking right past it. The trail of pressed earth continued, weaving downhill toward thicker brush. James studied the bends of the ground, noting where mud had been disturbed, where leaves were clumped unnaturally. Someone or something had come through here and tried to hide it. His pulse picked up. He remembered long nights in the desert, tracking paths like this with his unit, knowing that each faint mark in the sand could lead to danger. Now thousands of miles away, in a forest meant to be peaceful, the same instincts pulled him into focus. Max froze again, this time his ears pricked sharply, his head turning toward a thicket ahead. A low growl rumbled in his chest. James raised his hand slowly, signaling the dog to hold. The gesture came out automatically, an old command from years of patrol. Max stopped, waiting, eyes locked forward. James crouched low, steadying his breath, letting the forest settle around him. He could hear the faint creak of branches swaying, the soft trickle of water nearby, and beneath it all, something heavier in natural stillness, as if the woods themselves were holding back. He studied the ground again. The tread marks grew more defined here, the kind that came from something bigger than a deer. Maybe a vehicle, maybe dragged equipment. He didn't like the possibilities lining up in his head. "Stay close," James whispered. Max shifted silently to his side. Muscles taut, ready, they pushed deeper, the undergrowth clawing at their legs. Sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy, leaving most of the path in mottled shadow. James's eyes adjusted, searching for movement, scanning for edges that didn't belong. A flash of metal, a shape out of place. Minutes stretched, each step felt longer, like walking into a memory he couldn't escape. He thought of nights overseas when his team followed faint trails into villages that looked empty but weren't. How his heart had pounded then, the same way it pounded now. Max halted again, nose twitching, tail rigid. James followed his gaze, through the tangle of branches ahead. Something broke the natural pattern of the woods, a dull, curved line. Not bark, not stone, something smoother. James narrowed his eyes. He stepped closer, brushing aside a curtain of low branches, and there it was, half hidden beneath leaves and fallen limbs. A vehicle sat in silence, an old sedan, its paint dulled and streaked with dirt. The windshield smeared with rain and dust. Branches leaned against its frame, as though the forest itself had tried to swallow it whole. Max growled low again, then fell quiet, waiting for James's cue. James felt his jaw tighten. The forest wasn't just quiet anymore, it was holding something. He stood still, listening, his soldier's instincts cutting through the years. Whatever had happened here, whatever had been left behind, it wasn't by accident. And James knew this was the kind of moment where choices mattered.
James stayed frozen, eyes locked on the shape ahead. The forest pressed in around him, branches heavy with shadows. The car sat quiet, half buried under leaves and fallen limbs, like it had been left there for the woods to claim. Max stood beside him, ears sharp, chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. The dog didn't bark. He didn't need to. His silence was enough to tell James something wasn't right. James lowered himself to one knee, letting his weight rest quietly on the damp ground. He studied the area like he had 100 times before in places far more hostile than this. Check the tree line. Look for movement. Listen for irregular sounds. Measure the silence. It was all muscle memory. He hadn't done this in years, but his body hadn't forgotten. Back in the service, this was survival. The smallest detail could mean an ambush. A trail that looked abandoned could hide explosives. A building left empty could be bait. James's mind replayed those lessons now, unbidden with the same weight as back then. He drew a slow breath through his nose, grounding himself in the smells around him. Wet soil, faint metal in the air. Metal. His jaw tightened. He hadn't smelled it until now. His eyes scanned again. The car wasn't rusted through. The windows weren't shattered. Someone had left it here, and not long ago. "Stay sharp," he whispered, though Max already was. The shepherd shifted slightly forward, nose twitching, tail held low and stiff. James adjusted his stance, lowering his center of gravity as he approached the edge of the clearing. His boots pressed softly against the ground, careful, measured. Every step took him closer to the car, but also deeper into a memory. For a moment, the forest around him dissolved, replaced by sand and dust. He was back overseas, walking narrow roads at dusk, his rifle heavy in his hands, his heart pounding against his chest. A quiet street, no voices, no animals, just a faint hum of tension. That same tension wrapped around him now, years later, in this forest. He shook the thought away and focused on the present. But memories had a way of bleeding through when you least wanted them. He remembered a night when his unit followed tracks into a village. A door left ajar, a truck parked just outside the walls, and inside a trap waiting. They'd made it out, but not everyone did. The lesson cobbed itself into him. Never take silence at face value. James blinked, pulling himself back to the here and now. Max's growl was low, steady, vibrating through the ground. "All right," James murmured, tightening the strap across his chest. "Let's take a look." But before moving forward, he forced himself to stop again, to breathe. His training wasn't just about action. It was about control. Assess before advancing. Notice what others miss. He scanned the car one more time. Leaves piled high along its tires. Branches leaned against its roof. Whoever left it here hadn't wanted it seen. But why? His instincts told him two things at once: danger and responsibility. He couldn't turn back. If someone had hidden this vehicle, there was a reason. And if Max had brought him here, there was something that needed to be found. James rested his hand briefly on the dog's back. Max's muscles were taut, ready, but steady under his touch. The connection grounded him, pulling him out of the battlefield in his mind and back into the present. This wasn't war, not anymore. But the shadows of the past still clung to him, guiding his every move. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing on the car. He didn't know what he was about to find, but he knew one thing for certain: whatever waited inside, it wouldn't let him walk away unchanged. James stepped forward. Max followed, silent as the forest around them, and with each step closer, the line between past and present blurred just a little more.
James stopped just a few feet from the car. The forest held its breath, as if waiting for his next move. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was sharp, pressing against his ears. Max circled wide, nose close to the ground, tail still stiff. He wasn't just curious, he was tracking, searching, guarding. James scanned the vehicle again. The windows were fogged from the inside. Strange, the air out here was cool, fresh. Glass shouldn't hold that much condensation unless there was something alive inside. His pulse climbed. Instinct told him to back away, to keep distance until he understood the full picture. Training told him to move forward, methodical, controlled, and something deeper, harder to name, told him he had to know. He stepped closer. Each footfall was deliberate. His eyes moved over details most people wouldn't notice. The angle of the branches, the way the dirt was pressed down near the tires, the faint scrape along the driver's side door. This wasn't random. Somebody had tried to hide this. James adjusted his breathing, steadying the rhythm in his chest. He crouched near the driver's side, peering through the glass. Nothing, just fog and shadow. He wiped a circle clean with the side of his hand. The inside was dark, empty seats, dust across the dashboard, but behind the driver's seat, something shifted. A faint blur. James froze. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing, and then he saw Ita's small hand pressed weakly against the window. Pale, fragile, his breath caught. Max barked once, sharp and sudden, as if confirming what James already knew. There was someone inside, a child. For a moment, James didn't move. His mind raced with questions. Why here? Why alone? Was this a trap? He forced the thoughts into order. First step, secure the scene. Second, open the car. Third, deal with what he found. He tried the handle, locked. He muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Max. Figures. He circled to the back, eyes never leaving the tree line. If someone left a child here, they could still be nearby. His hand brushed against the small knife strapped at his side, not a weapon of war, but a tool, a habit carried over from years in the field. At the trunk, he tried again. Locked. He tapped the metal twice, listening. Solid. Back at the rear passenger side, he cupped his hands against the glass. Inside, the child shifted again, weak and slow. James could just make out a face, sunken cheeks, eyes half closed, lips dry. The kid was alive, but barely. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. This wasn't just survival training anymore. This was human, immediate. "All right, hang on," he said quietly, voice steady. James grabbed a rock from the ground. He hesitated for only a second. Then, with a sharp swing, he smashed the corner of the rear window. The glass cracked, then shattered outward with a hollow pop. Max flinched at the sound but stayed close, guarding. James reached through, unlocking the door from the inside. He pulled it open carefully, pushing leaves and branches aside. The smell hit him first: stale air, damp fabric, and the sour trace of fear. The child sat slumped across the seat, too weak to even flinch at the noise. James slid in, slow, gentle, lowering his voice to a calm tone he hadn't used in years. "Hey, you're safe now. I've got you." The boy's eyes fluttered, barely opening. His lips moved, but no words came. James pulled his canteen from his belt, uncapping it with one hand. He tilted it lightly, letting a drop touch the boy's lips. Then another. The child swallowed. Slow, shaky. Max pressed closer, his nose almost touching the seat, his breath steady and warm. The dog's presence seemed to fill the space with a kind of reassurance. James adjusted the boy's posture, making sure his airway was clear, checking for visible injuries. Old habits, life-saving habits. His mind spun again. Who was this kid? How long had he been here? And who left him? But those questions could wait. Right now, there was only one mission: get him out, keep him alive. James pulled the boy carefully into his arms, cradling his fragile frame against his chest. He was light, too light. He stepped out of the car, broken glass crunching under his boots. Max circled, ears high, scanning the forest. James looked around one last time. The woods were still silent, but the silence felt different now, like it was watching, holding secrets he hadn't uncovered yet. He tightened his grip on the boy and gave Max a nod. "We're moving, together." Man and dog turned away from the car, carrying with them not just a child, but the beginning of something James didn't yet understand. The forest didn't give answers. Not yet, but it had delivered this, and James knew whatever path lay ahead, it had just changed.
James stood by the car, the forest pressing in around him. The air smelled of wet leaves and rust. The windows were smeared with dirt, streaked by years of rain. From the outside, the vehicle looked forgotten, abandoned like junk left to rot. But Max didn't think so. The shepherd's body stayed tense, ears forward, nose twitching. His tail was low, stiff, not wagging. This wasn't curiosity. This was focus. James drew a slow breath. He placed one hand on the cold metal of the door handle. The steel bit at his skin. As if warning him, he pulled. The door creaked open. A sharp smell rushed out, stale air, damp fabric, something sour underneath. James's stomach tightened. He leaned in, flashlight angled low. That's when he saw it. A child, small, curled into the corner of the back seat. Knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tight, clothes dirty, hair tangled. Her eyes caught the beam of light, white, frozen, shining with fear. James froze too. His breath caught in his throat. For half a second, he thought his mind was playing tricks, that this couldn't be real. But the trembling shoulders told him it was. Hey, his voice dropped soft, steady. It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. The girl didn't answer. Her chest rose and fell too fast, each breath shallow. She pushed herself harder into the corner, like she could disappear into the seat. Max stepped forward. His growl was gone. In its place came a quiet whine. He lowered his head, eyes gentle, tail giving the smallest twitch. Slowly, carefully, he rested his chin on the edge of the seat. The girl's eyes darted to him. She didn't move, but her breathing shifted still faster, but less sharp. The first crack in the wall of fear. James stayed still, letting Max bridge the gap. The shepherd had always been better at breaking silence than any words could. Minutes passed, neither of them rushed her. Finally, James spoke again, quiet. Can you tell me your name? The girl's lips moved, but no sound came. She shook her head, pressing her arms tighter around her knees. That's okay, James said. Steady. You don't have to. You're safe now. His own words echoed in his head. Safe now. It was a phrase he had said before, in another time, another place. Back then, it hadn't always been true. The weight of that memory pressed against him, but he pushed it down. Not now, not yet. Max shifted closer. He nudged her hand with his nose, soft and patient. She flinched at first, but then, slowly, she let her small fingers brush his fur. Max licked her hand, once, gentle. A sound came, barely more than a whisper. Lucy. James caught it. Lucy. She nodded, eyes still locked on him, watery but steady for the first time. Okay, Lucy, James said, breathing out slow. That's a good name. She blinked, clutching Max's fur tighter, as if anchoring herself to him. The forest around them seemed to close in. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, reminding you that something was off. James felt it. This wasn't just a lost child. There was more to this story. But one thing was already clear. He could not walk away. He could not fail her. Not again. James held his breath, watching Lucy cling to Max. Her small frame shook, her eyes wide, her trust still hanging by a thread. And then, the memory came, not gentle, not gradual. It slammed into him. He wasn't in the forest anymore. He was back overseas. The air was hot, thick with dust and gunpowder. He could hear the crack of rifles, the shouts in a language he never fully understood. The smell of smoke clung to everything, and in the middle of it children. He remembered the first time. A small village on the edge of hostile territory. His unit had gone in after reports of rebel activity. What they found was worse than anything in the briefing. A family torn apart, a mother screaming for her son, and the boy dragged away into the back of a truck, rebels firing into the air as they sped off. James and his team had orders: secure the perimeter, hold position, don't pursue. He could still hear his sergeant's voice. Cold, final, but he had seen the boy's face. Terrified, helpless, the same look he now saw in Lucy's eyes. He remembered another mission. Months later, another child. This time, a girl, maybe 10 years old, found locked in a hut after a raid. She was alive, but broken, silent. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't look at anyone. James had tried. He had given her water, food, gentle words. She wouldn't take any of it. She sat against the wall, eyes fixed on nothing. 2 days later, she was gone, moved to another camp, out of his hands, out of his control, and the guilt never left. He carried those faces with him. They came back in dreams, in the quiet moments when the world slowed down. The war ended, but the memories didn't. Now, here in these quiet woods, looking at Lucia, he felt it all over again. The same fear, the same helplessness, the same responsibility. Only this time, he wasn't a soldier under orders. This time he had a choice. He clenched his jaw. His hands tightened into fists, then loosened. He looked at Lucy again. She wasn't just a scared child in an abandoned car. She was every child he couldn't save before. Every face that haunted him, and something inside him shifted. The forest around them grew darker as evening pressed in, but James's focus sharpened. The weight of his past wasn't crushing him this time, it was pushing him forward. "Lucy," he said softly, "steady, you're not alone. Not anymore." She didn't answer. She just held on to Max, her small fingers tangled in his fur. But she heard him. He could see it in the way her shoulders eased, just a little. James sat back on his heels. The memories still heavy but no longer in control. They had shaped him, scarred him, but now they gave him something else. Resolve. He wasn't going to let history repeat itself. This wasn't a battlefield. This wasn't another field mission. This was a second chance, and he would not waste it. James stayed crouched beside the car, the echoes of war still ringing in his head. Faces from the past blurred into the present. Lucy's eyes carried the same fear, the same silent plea he had seen before. But this time, he wasn't bound by orders. He wasn't just another soldier following protocol. This time, the choice was his. He looked at Lucy, small, fragile, gripping Max as if he were her last anchor to the world. The dog stayed calm, letting her hold on, his steady breathing slowing hers. James's chest tightened. He felt the vow form inside him. Wordless at first, then, clear. Not again. Not this time. He had failed before. He had been powerless before. But he wasn't powerless now. "Lucy," he said quietly, though he knew she might not fully understand, "I'm going to get you home. I promise." Her eyes flicked toward him. She didn't speak. She didn't smile, but she didn't pull away either, and that was enough. James slid his pack off his shoulders. Digging inside, he pulled out a small thermal blanket, one he always carried. Slowly, carefully, he held it out. Lucy hesitated, watching him, her body tense. But when Max nosed the blanket, wagging his tail just once, she reached out, tiny fingers clutched the edge. She pulled it around her shoulders. It was a small victory, but James felt it deep, a signal of trust beginning to grow. He sat back, letting her breathe, letting her find her own rhythm. His own thoughts drifted for a moment. He thought of his unit, of the night he had sworn silently that the next time he would do more. Those vows had been broken by circumstance, by command, by the cruel logic of war. But here, under the shadow of these mountains, with no one to give orders but himself, his vow could finally mean something. He studied Lucy again. Dirt smeared her cheeks, hair tangled and matted, but beneath it all was the simple truth. She was just a child who needed someone to fight for her. Max shifted, resting his head against her lap. She let out the smallest sound, half a sigh, half a whimper, and her fingers sank into his fur. James caught it. That sound mattered. It was proof she wasn't locked away entirely. She was still here, still reachable. He leaned forward slightly. "You're not alone now," he said, steady, almost to himself as much as to her. Not anymore. The forest outside was darkening, the quiet pressing harder. Time was moving. They couldn't stay here long, but James didn't rush. He knew the next steps would be harder, harder than anything today had thrown at him yet. For now, it was enough to let the vow settle deep in his bones. He would get her out. He would get her home. And in keeping that promise, maybe, just maybe, he could find his own way back too. James stood, pulling the pack onto his shoulders again. He glanced at Max. The shepherd rose immediately, eyes locked on him, ready, loyal as always. "All right, buddy," James murmured. "We've got work to do." Max gave a soft huff, as if in agreement. James looked at Lucy one last time before they stepped away from the car. "Stay close to Max. He'll keep you safe." Her small nod sealed it. Not much, but enough. And with that, the vow was made, unspoken, unbreakable. The forest at night was a world of shadows. Every branch creaked like a warning. Every gust of wind carried whispers James couldn't ignore. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, its narrow beam cutting only a small path forward. Beyond it, everything was unknown. Lucy walked close behind Max, one hand clinging to the shepherd's fur. Her small frame was almost swallowed by the oversized blanket James had wrapped around her. Every so often, she stumbled on roots or uneven ground, but Max steadied her, slowing his pace just enough to keep her balanced. James kept looking back, checking on them both. Each time, Lucy's eyes met his for a second longer than before, silent, but not as distant as when he had first found her. The cold bit at him, sharper with every hour. His breath hung in the air, clouding his view. The memories pushed harder in the dark nights overseas when the cold wasn't just weather, it was fear, it was doubt. He remembered the weight of carrying lives in his hands, and the crushing emptiness when he failed. But this time wasn't the same. This time he had a choice. He had made a vow. The trail grew steeper. James reached back, offering his hand. Lucy hesitated, staring at it for a long moment. She didn't move. Then, slowly, she placed her small hand in his. He pulled her up the slope, steady and firm. No words were spoken. None were needed. Hours passed in silence, broken only by Max's steady panting and the crunch of their boots against frost-covered leaves. The forest stretched endlessly, but James kept pushing. Each step forward was one step further from the wreckage, one step closer to safety. At one point, a distant howl cut through the night. James froze, instinctively moving in front of Lucy. Max stiffened, ears pricked, body tense. Lucy pressed against him, eyes wide with fear. James scanned the dark. Nothing moved. The sound faded, swallowed by the trees. Still, he knew what it meant. The night belonged to more than just them. Danger was real, and it was closer than he wanted to admit. He crouched, meeting Lucy's eyes. Stay close to Max. Don't let go. She nodded quickly, fingers tightening in the shepherd's fur. The words weren't much, but they mattered. They meant she was listening. She trusted enough to follow his lead. They moved again, slower now, careful with each step. James felt the weight of his pack digging into his shoulders, muscles burning from hours of carrying more than just supplies. He was carrying the future of a child. He was carrying the vow he had sworn to himself. Midway through the night, they reached a small clearing. James called a halt. He set his pack down, motioning for Lucy to sit beside Max. She obeyed without protest, curling up against the shepherd's warm body. James scanned the perimeter, instincts sharp. The soldier in him never rested. Only after he was sure they were safe for the moment did he sit down across from them. He watched as Lucy buried her face in Max's fur, her shoulders rising and falling with shaky breaths. Max stayed perfectly still, the unspoken guardian he always was. James felt something shift inside him. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't a reminder of failure. It was a space being filled slowly by trust. He leaned back, eyes scanning the stars overhead. They were faint, hidden by branches, but enough to remind him there was still direction, still light even in the darkest places. Through the night, he whispered under his breath, "We'll make it through the night." He wasn't sure if Lucy heard him. He wasn't sure if she even understood, but he knew she felt the same thing. He did that. This was no longer just survival. It was connection. The vow was alive now, no longer silent. It was in every step, every glance, every breath shared in the dark. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, but tonight, he would keep them moving forward, and he would not let go. The forest was still dark when they moved again. James had given Lucy a few minutes of rest, but he knew stopping too long was dangerous. Cold seeped in fast, and the night carried more than silence. Lucy walked with one hand holding Max's fur, the other clutching the blanket around her shoulders. James kept the flashlight aimed low, scanning the ground ahead for roots, rocks, or anything that could trip her. Every step was measured, deliberate. "Doing okay back there?" he asked, his voice low. Lucy didn't answer, but she looked up for a second, then gave a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was something. Max seemed to sense the shift. He slowed his pace, keeping her steady. His tail brushed against her side, a quiet reassurance. The dog had become more than protection, he was a bridge. James glanced back again, studying her face in a narrow beam of light. Fear was still there, written in her eyes, but it wasn't the same paralyzing fear as before. Something was different. There was a thread of trust beginning to form, fragile but real, to keep her mind away from the darkness around them. James started talking. His voice was calm, steady, the way he had once spoken to younger soldiers in the field when panic threatened to take over. "You know, Max wasn't always this calm," he said, half smiling. "First time I brought him home, he chewed through my boots. Took me weeks to train him, but now, he's my partner, smarter than I am most days." For the first time, Lucy's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was small, but it was real. James kept going, offering simple stories about Max chasing deer he could never catch, about nights when the dog snored louder than thunder. Nothing heavy, nothing that would scare her away. Each word was chosen carefully, not for himself, but for her. The forest tested them again. Branches snapped in the distance, the sound echoing too close. James froze, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Max growled low, body tense. Lucy clutched his fur tighter, eyes wide. James lowered his hand after a long moment, forcing his body to relax. He couldn't let fear consume them. He turned, kneeling down so Lucy could see his face. "It's just the forest," he said softly. "No one's going to hurt you. Not while we're here." She stared at him, searching his eyes for truth. Slowly, she gave another small nod. It was fragile, but it was trust. They pressed on. Hours dragged. The trail felt endless, but James kept moving, driven by the vow he had made. The soldier in him scanned every shadow, but the man in him carried something heavier: responsibility. Near dawn, the forest began to thin. The darkness wasn't as suffocating. A pale light touched the horizon, cutting through the branches overhead. Lucy noticed it first. Her small voice broke the long silence. "It's morning." James glanced at her, surprised. It was the first time she had spoken since he found her. "Yeah," he said, keeping his tone steady. "Morning's coming." Her grip on Max loosened just a little. She looked forward again, her shoulders lifting as if the light itself gave her strength. James felt the shift inside himself too. It wasn't over. The night had tested them, but they had endured it together, and in that endurance something had been built. Not walls, not silence. Trust. Fragile, yes, was strong enough to carry them into the next day. The sky was beginning to change. What had been endless black now carried shades of gray and pale blue. James noticed it first, then beams of light cutting through the canopy overhead. They had been walking for hours, but this was different. The forest no longer pressed in around them. The air was lighter, the silence less heavy. Lucy stopped, staring at the faint glow breaking through the trees. "It's brighter," she whispered, almost as if she didn't believe it. James nodded. "That means we're close." Max wagged his tail, ears perked. He seemed to sense it too. His nose lifted. Catching scents carried on the morning breeze, faint but human. Civilization wasn't far. James took a deep breath. Relief tried to push through, but he kept himself steady. Too many years as a soldier had taught him that danger liked to hide right at the finish line. They pressed forward, step by step. The ground began to rise, then break open. Through the thinning trees, James spotted something he hadn't seen in hours. Not just trees, but open space. He crouched low, signaling Max with a hand gesture. The dog stilled immediately, trained to follow without hesitation. James scanned the horizon, every muscle alert. Then, in the distance, not a weapon, not a trap, a guardrail. They had found the road. James felt his chest tighten. After everything they had made it. Lucy stepped closer, her small hand still tangled in Max's fur. Her eyes followed James's gaze until she saw it too. A sharp breath escaped her lips, half sob, half relief. "Are we safe now?" she asked, voice trembling. James looked down at her, then back at the road. He let the question hang for a moment, weighing it. Finally, he nodded. "We're safe," but he knew they weren't done yet. He reached for the radio clipped to his vest. The device had been silent all night, the thick forest killing any signal. But here, on higher ground, maybe things would be different. He pressed the button. Static filled the air. His heart sank, then steadied. He adjusted the frequency. Tried again. "This is Walker, Forest Patrol. I have a child with me. We need immediate extraction at Sector 12, Ridgeline North." Silence. Then, crackling. A voice answered, faint but real. "Copy that, Walker. Stay put. We're on our way." James exhaled, closing his eyes for just a second. The words hit harder than he expected. They weren't alone anymore. Lucy tugged his sleeve. "They're coming." "Yes," James said, voice steady but softer than before. "They're coming." Max barked once, sharp and confident, as if confirming it. Minutes stretched. The three of them stood near the edge of the trees, watching the road. The first rays of sun broke fully over the horizon, turning the forest gold. It wasn't just light. It was hope, tangible and undeniable. James felt the weight on his shoulders shift. He had carried fear, memory, responsibility through the night. Now, for the first time, it lifted just enough to let him breathe. He looked at Lucy. Her face, tired and pale, was no longer frozen by terror. The light touched her eyes, and in them, he saw something new. Not despair, not fear, survival, and trust. James placed his steady hand on her shoulder. "We made it through the night. That's the hardest part." She leaned into Max, and for the first time, she believed him. The sound of engines came next, distant but growing. Rescue was no longer a promise. It was real, for James, for Lucy. For Maxie. Night was over, and the day had begun. The sound of engines grew louder. James stood still, his hand firm on Lucy's shoulder, eyes fixed on the curve of the road below. Max's ears twitched, tail held high, body tense with alertness but not fear. And then, headlights. Two vehicles appeared, winding up the narrow mountain road, gravel crunching under their tires. Lucy gasped, for the first time since James had found her. Her face lit up not with fear, but with recognition. "That's them," she whispered. "That's my mom and dad." Her small voice broke something inside James. Relief, gratitude, a weight, finally lifting. The first truck stopped just yards away. Door slammed open. A woman ran out, her cry piercing the morning air. "Lucy!" The girl broke free from James's hand and sprinted forward. Her legs wobbled, but her speed was pure instinct. The woman fell to her knees on the asphalt, arms outstretched. Lucy crashed into her embrace, sobbing into her mother's chest. The woman clutched her daughter tight, rocking back and forth as tears streamed down her face. A man rushed forward next, dropping beside them. His hands shook as he touched his daughter's hair, her arms, her face, as if he couldn't believe she was real. "She's safe," James said, his voice carrying low but steady. "She made it." The parents looked up, eyes wet, faces lined with fear and relief. Words stumbled out between sobs. Thank you for bringing her back." James gave a small nod, his throat tightening. He didn't need their gratitude. Seeing Lucy alive, clinging to her parents, was enough. Max trotted forward, tail wagging, and Lucy turned from her mother's embrace just long enough to reach out and hug the dog. "He saved me," she said through her tears. "Max saved me." The parents leaned down, stroking the German shepherd's fur, whispering their thanks again and again. Max accepted it all with quiet dignity, standing tall, as if he understood. Rescue team members began moving around them, checking the girl's vitals, offering blankets, speaking into radios. But the world seemed to shrink to just that small circle, parents and child reunited. James stepped back. He wanted to give them space. Watching them, his chest felt heavy but full. In Lucy's trembling arms around her mother, he saw something he hadn't seen in years, something he had thought was gone forever. Family, safety, the kind of love that survives the darkest nights. He remembered the faces of children he hadn't been able to save overseas, the cries he could never silence. For years, those memories had haunted him, but now, here, he saw one child safe, one family whole again. It didn't erase the past, nothing could, but it eased the sharpest edge of it. Lucy looked up from her mother's arms. Her eyes found James. She didn't say much, just one word, soft but certain. "Thank you." James met her gaze. For a long second, it felt like the whole forest held its breath. Then he gave her the smallest of nods, his eyes steady. Max barked once, sharp and clear, as if sealing the moment. The sun had fully risen now, spilling gold over the ridge. The night's darkness was gone, replaced by light and warmth. James let out a slow breath. The mission was over. The girl was home, but inside him, something had shifted. He hadn't just rescued Lucy. In some way, she had rescued him too. The reunion was still unfolding, filled with tears, relief, and the sound of voices that no longer trembled with fear. James stood a few steps back, hands resting at his sides, watching quietly. He didn't need to step closer. The family didn't need him in that circle. They had what mattered most, their child back in their arms. Max sat beside him, calm now, as if his work was complete. The dog's steady breathing grounded James, pulling him away from the rush of memories and into the present. James let his gaze drift across the ridge. The sun was fully awake now, spilling across the mountains. The sky carried the promise of a new day. For the first time in years, he let himself feel that promise. He thought about the war again, the children he hadn't saved, the guilt that had followed him home and stayed with him every day since. For so long it had defined him, a shadow he couldn't escape. But standing here, watching Lucy safe in her mother's arms, James realized something had changed. He had done what he couldn't do back then. He had pulled one child out of the dark and brought her into the light. It didn't erase the past. It didn't make the scars disappear, but it softened them. It gave them meaning. James crouched down, resting a hand on Max's fur. The dog looked up at him, eyes steady, loyal, unshaken. James managed a small smile. "We did good, partner," he murmured. "Real good." Max wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate, as if he understood. The rescue team began guiding the family toward the vehicles. Lucy glanced back, her hand still gripping her mother's. Her eyes met James's one last time. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her expression said, "It all trusts safety, gratitude." James nodded back, holding her gaze just long enough for her to know he understood. As the trucks pulled away, carrying Lucy and her family down the mountain, silence settled again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This was lighter, easier, peaceful. James stood there with Max, watching the dust settle on the road. The forest felt different now, not just a place of shadows and memories, but a place of second chances. He had come into the night carrying ghosts. He left it carrying something else. James straightened, shoulders no longer heavy, and started walking back along the trail with Max at his side. The forest patrol would continue. There would be more long nights, more unknowns. But he knew something now that he hadn't known before. He wasn't just protecting the land. He wasn't just enforcing rules. He was saving pieces of himself. One step, one act at a time. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon with fire and gold. James paused for a moment, taking it in. The war had taken many things from him, but today, this mountain, this child, this bond with his dog, they had given something back. Not redemption, not absolution, something simpler, life. James looked at Max and whispered, "Let's go home." Together, they walked into the fading light, side by side.